Hey, welcome to the Eagle Insight Podcast. Today's guest is a warrior diplomat. This is Chris Kolenda, and he's a U.S. Army veteran, founder of the Strategic Leaders Academy. He's a strategic leadership consultant, an author, a speaker, a coach, a combat veteran, and perhaps most importantly to me, he's a mentor and a friend. Chris, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bob. I'm thrilled to be here.
So your website says that you help leaders close the gap between their performance and their potential, and it kind of begged the question that when I was reading that, I thought, well, what if I don't know I have a gap? What if I think I'm living up to my potential? What do you say to a business leader that has that perspective?
Yeah, I'll ask if there are any objectives that feel just out of reach. And invariably, they're going to say, well, yes, of course. There are some objectives that seem like just out of reach. No matter what I do, I just can't quite get there. And of course, if they say, well, there's no objectives that are out of reach, then it's like, well, maybe your goals are too low. Have you considered that? And so that'll drive different conversations. If you recall the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade as a kind of a metaphor, there is at the end of the movie, Indiana Jones is going for the Holy Grail, and he is reading this thing called the Book of Knowledge that's taken him through these various obstacles, razor blades threatening to chop off his head and things like that. And he gets through all of that, and he gets to a point where he can see the Grail, and he sees this 1,000-year-old Maltese knight who's guarding all of these grails, and between him and the grails is this huge canyon, and so he sees his objective, and he doesn't know how to get there. It's just out of reach. So he looks back down at the Book of Knowledge, and it says, "Stand here and take a leap of faith." So Jones stands on that specific spot, steps out into the chasm. And as he steps out, he lands on this invisible bridge. He scampers across it. And then what does he do when he gets to the end? Is he picks up a bunch of sand and he throws it across the bridge, illuminating the bridge so other people can cross. And so that's a bit of a metaphor for this closing the gap between your performance and your potential. And how I like to help people do that is by accumulating, using all of the couple thousand years of wisdom from ancient Greco-Roman philosophy, history, practical experience, and studies, and bringing the smart ideas that other people have figured out together in a way that becomes a practical scaffolding, if you will, a practical bridge to help people get from the performance that they currently have to the potential that they have. And then once you achieve that next level of potential, you realize that there's even greater stuff beyond that.
That's awesome. The theory and the history and the wisdom of ancients, the philosophy, all of that stuff is it sounds really academic, and then at the end you're like, but there's a practicality, right? If you're a business owner, you don't really care what Sun Tzu said, right? You don't really care what Plato said so much as how do I increase my profits and make my business sustainably profitable over time.
Yeah, there's a great metaphor or story in Xenophon, who is one of Plato's, or a pupil of Socrates. So Plato, you had Xenophon as pupils, and Xenophon was a military leader, etc. And he has a book called the Anabasis, which is this journey from Iraq to Greece and back, and or from Greece to Iraq and then back. It's the retreat of the 10,000, and he leads this retreat. But before he becomes the commander of it, he tells a story about the commander A, who believed in accountability by very harsh measures. So any deviation, it was, off with your head or 50 lashes or whatever. He like thrived on punishment. And of course, everybody revolted against him. And then and then the second person comes along as kind of as the pendulum swings the other way. And the second one believed that accountability was about praising people for good action and withholding praise for when the action wasn't good. And of course, what happened is everybody walked all over him. And Xenophon's approach, he comes in next, is a more balanced one. And I think it's a wonderful story about accountability that leaders have struggled with for the last couple thousand years. How do you create accountability that improves future performance, and avoids the extremes of either creating a toxic work environment, or an environment which people walk all over you, and so then you can develop a lot of very practical guides from that, and I'd be happy to discuss that if you're interested.
Well, I love the idea of accountability as a incredibly important leadership skill. To hold people accountable is a struggle for many leaders, and HBR's got a study that says 70% of all leaders, independent of demographics, struggle with accountability at some point in their career. And that is one of the most difficult things, particularly for new leaders, to get their heads around is I have to hold people accountable. And I think one of the big barriers is the need to be liked. People want to be a popular leader. And so this is, Xenophon's second character who's a little bit easier to walk all over because they're popularity seeking as opposed to leadership.
Yeah, you want to be a servant leader, in quotes. And so people will take that to mean, well, if somebody's not going to do their jobs, then I'll simply do it for them because I'm serving them and I'm serving the organization. And that's why the idea of servant leadership can get really toxic and create a lot of leader burnout. And on accountability, you're exactly right. If you look at, if you use kind of a bell curve. So if you look at accountability as a bit of a bell curve, and on the north-south axis would be number of accountability tools that you have at your disposal as a leader, and the east-west axis being employee performance, and then you're going to get a normal distribution where at the tail end on the left is poor performance, aberrant behavior, and you have just a finite number of tools to deal with that. You have essentially penalty and punishment. Penalty means you take something away. Punishment means you add something to the plate. At the tail on the far right, where you have extraordinary performance, heroic performance, you similarly have just a few tools, and those would be like awards, medals, bonuses, certificates, things like that. You can only do that so many times. And most leaders are focused on the tails. And the problem is, by focusing on the tails, you're always swinging behind the pitch. Where what you have to do accountability-wise is focus on the middle. Because that's where most of your opportunity is. And also where you have an unlimited amount of tools to shape behavior. Because that's what accountability is all about, shaping behavior that improves future performance. And so if you were to take the top of the bell curve and just draw a dotted line right down there, to the left of the dotted line would be, this dotted line represents the standard. Just to the left would be slightly below standard performance. And what you want to do there is apply supportive criticism. Not constructive criticism, we can talk about that. Supportive criticism. Because what you want to do is nip bad performance, bad habits in the bud before they become actual habits, which then that's very difficult to change. And supportive criticism essentially has 3 steps. Step 1 is you note the performance. I've noticed that you've been struggling with this. I've noticed that this isn't quite coming out to standard. Step 2, here's the impact. So the impact of not doing this to standard is we're increasing the amount of waste and rework, which is undermining our profitability. Third step is here's how to do it better. Here's how to do it right next time. And here's how I'm going to support you in doing that. So you are expressing confidence that the person can do it right, and you are going to invest your time and energy to giving them the tools and the support that they need to do it right consistently. So that's supportive criticism. Now, on the right side of the dotted line, you have positive reinforcement. And like supportive criticism, you've got an unlimited number of tools. I mean, you can have these short conversations an unlimited number of times. And so what you want to do there on the positive reinforcement side is note that the person is doing the right thing and that you appreciate it. Because what that does is it alerts the person that you see them, you notice them, doing things to standard or slightly above it, and you appreciate it, so they know exactly what behavior to repeat. And so does everybody else around them, because they've heard the same thing. And so 3 very similar steps. Hey, I noticed you doing this, this good thing. Step 2, here's the impact that it's having. So I've noticed that as a sales person, you are very much focused on our ideal client. And so by doing that, we are reducing the number of difficult jobs that we have to do. We're doing more jobs within our sweet spot, which is increasing our profitability. And because of that, everybody's going to get a better bonus this year. I appreciate that. I want you to keep doing it. Positive reinforcement. Take you a couple minutes to say that, and now you've just given both that person a boost, help them understand what behavior you want them to reinforce, and same with everybody around them. And you can do that. There's no limit to the amount you can do that because it's a face-to-face exchange.
Yeah, and Chris, you've hit on something that's really incredibly important for leaders to understand about giving feedback to people is the specificity matters, right? Telling somebody, hey, you're doing a great job, keep it up. It may have some small bolstering effect, but what you described, okay, I noticed that you're focusing really hard on getting ideal clients that are going to make us more profitable. The specifics of the praise matters a lot so that it reinforces a specific activity or behavior. And also it changes the listeners who are hearing that about what kind of specific. If it's like, well, just do a good job or be better sort of thing. So Chris, I think you're doing great. Then everybody's like, okay, I got to go be more like Chris, but they don't know how. So the specificity is really, really important.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what you just tell them you're awesome. Well, they don't know what behavior to repeat. They don't know if you're just blowing sunshine at them.
Right.
What leaders typically do, which is really damaging, is the so-called feedback sandwich.
Mm.
The feedback sandwich is where you start with something nice, and then you give them the constructive criticism, and then you end with something nice. So it sounds something like, Bob, you're awesome. That was such a great job on this presentation. This slide was all jacked up, and this slide clearly didn't connect, and nobody had any idea what you were talking about on this particular topic. But that was great.
Right.
And employees are like, wait a minute. What am I really hearing? And what they hear is, well, they blew sunshine at me, and then they told me how they really feel, and then they blew some more sunshine. So the conclusion that most employees will come to after the feedback sandwich is, like, Bob hates me. Bob thinks I'm incompetent. Bob thinks I'm awful. And it's exactly the effect where you gave Manila sort of praise, and then you gave specific criticism, and you followed up with Manila praise. So what you want to do, you can do this went great, these were not so great. This went great. But what you want to do is add the specificity.
Yeah, I first learned the sandwich when I was becoming a youth soccer coach, and it works pretty well with the 6-year-old crowd. So, because their feelings get hurt pretty easily if you criticize them, and so the youth sports coaches are like, hey, you really want to sandwich this stuff. But what I found was exactly what happens with adults is they will walk away from that encounter and they'll go, he said some really nice things about me. Well, did he give you anything to work on? No. He basically said I was really good. Because I started and ended with that, and the kid, that's all they heard. A lot of adults do that.
Yeah, as adults, they do the opposite.
They do the opposite, right? But the same effect of you're not communicating exactly what you wanted to. And I think there's a trap in your feedback that leaders often face, which is we have a tendency to want to be liked, as I said, and we have this kind of thing about empathy. We want to be an empathetic leader, and we want to show that we care. And so we care more about those employees' feelings than we do about their improvement. And so we sugarcoat things, and we tell them, no, Bob, you're doing just fine. You just keep doing what you're doing. And I call that malignant empathy. It's great that you care about Bob's feelings. It's not so great that you don't care about his growth. And in order for him to grow, he's got to know he's not meeting standards.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point, and one of the reasons why I prefer an approach called supportive criticism as opposed to constructive criticism.
Yeah. Can you unpack the difference for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Supportive criticism, as I outlined in those 3 steps, says, I have confidence that you can do this right, and here's how I'm going to help you do that. So I am in your corner. I have got your back. I'm going to help you be successful. Constructive criticism essentially says, you're not doing this right, and you need to do it better. And so what happens invariably with constructive criticism is people will focus their energy on justifying their actions, on defending themselves, and less attention on exactly what you're saying. So the 7 words no employee ever wants to hear: may I give you some feedback? Because automatically, or maybe that's 6 words, automatically the shields go up, and you're like, okay, I'm getting ready to be attacked here, and I've got to defend myself.
Those are important encounters for leaders to recognize when they put an employee into what we call lizard brain mode, right? Where they're thinking fight or flight, and all they want to do is survive that encounter.
That's right.
And they will say or do anything to get out of the room, particularly when you get pulled in and there's multiple leaders there. You know, you get hauled into the corner office and you've got the CEO and the COO and maybe a VP in there looking at you and like, well, let's talk about this. That employee has now gone to lizard brain. They will say or do anything to get out of the room because it's just incredibly uncomfortable for them.
Yeah, and they come away with a very negative experience.
Right.
And of course you don't get better performance. And so instead of giving feedback, what I encourage leaders to do is to feed forward. And feed forward, whereas feedback will focus on past action, feed forward focuses on future action. Because ultimately that's what you want, is improve future performance and not make people sort of stew in their juices or whatever about the past. This is not like confession in the Catholic Church. Accountability is not confession. Or an AA meeting where somebody stands up and says, I'm an alcoholic. That's not what you want. What you want is people focused on the future. And so I encourage leaders to ask 4 questions in sessions, maybe after a major event or every 90 days or so. Structure the conversation around these 4 questions. The first one is, what's going well that you want to keep doing? And get them talking. Second question, because invariably 95% of the stuff that they're doing is probably good at standard or above. Second question is, in what ways did you improve over last time? So invariably, they made some sort of changes that resulted in some improvement from the last 90 days or the previous event or whatever. The third step is, what would you like to do better next time? And so that gets them focused on, how do I want to continue improving? And you'll notice in these first three questions that maybe there are some gaps. And you may have identified some good things or improvements that they didn't mention. And so you can interject those things. They may miss something that you think they ought to do better next time. And you can say, tell me more about this. And it's also a great way, using these open-ended questions, to see, just to gauge somebody's self-awareness. And then the fourth question, which is absolutely vital, is, what does ideal support for me look like in helping you sustain and improve? And then that essentially creates a contract between you and your employee about how you're going to support them in being successful, and what and their accountabilities in terms of what they are going to sustain and what they're going to improve upon. So that feeding forward takes all the awkwardness out of accountability conversations and gets things focused, because it's focused on the future, and you can't get defensive about something that hasn't happened yet.
Love that. So those are insightful questions, right? Because it requires them to actually think through what they've been doing and projecting that into a future state so that they can see where their goals should be or where their aspirations should be in terms of their performance and behaviors.
Yeah.
It's great stuff.
Yeah. You're essentially getting them to identify the gap between their performance and their potential, and you are then supporting them, providing the scaffolding, providing the bridge, so to speak, to help them reach new heights.
That's awesome. And I think, part of this portion of what you're talking about is largely along the lines of accountability. But that's only one of the things that you talk about when you speak about high-performing organizations, right? You talk about the ABCs of high-performing organizations, and A must be the accountability piece of that. What's the rest of it?
Yeah, the B and the C are buy-in and clarity.
Awesome. Tell me more about buy-in.
Sure. So I give the ABCs. First of all, easy to remember, and second of all, it has the benefit of being true. So if you want a high-performing organization, people need to understand the standards for what I call the common good, which is your mission and vision, your goals, your values and standards. So that's your common good. Second, they need to advance that common good voluntarily. So that's buy-in. And third is you want to continuously improve, and that's the accountability. And you got to have all three. If you lack clarity, people don't understand the common good, then they are going to be confused. They're gonna move in multiple directions, and so that's of course that creates its own challenges. Hard to get people moving the boat forward if they're all rowing at different times and in different directions.
Yeah. Being crystal clear about where you're going is kind of important. And I was like the people who have a big vision, they're like, okay, we're going to take the team, we're going to go to Europe. And like everybody point to Europe, and everybody points in generally the same direction. But if you're coming from anywhere in the United States, you're pointing in a general direction. You're like, okay, great, I will meet you there. And your team gets up and they find their way to Europe, and you're like, hey, where is everybody? Because one of you's in Germany, one of you's in Lithuania for some reason. Somebody's going to France, and you're not all on the same sheet of music. You're not even on the same map page. Yeah. So there's got to be
in Moscow, yeah.
Right. And why did they go to Moscow? It's very dangerous. So having the clarity and the specificity of here's where we're going, but here's specifically where we're going.
Yeah, exactly. And so you got to have clarity about your common good. Without accountability, you're going to get backsliding and inconsistent performance. And then without buy-in, what you're going to get is compliance behavior. So without buy-in, you're not going to get innovation. You're not going to get people giving their discretionary effort. They're just going to do the minimum to get by. And so buy-in, when you look at buy-in, first of all, you have to have clarity about what you want people to buy into. So there could be what do we mean by profitable growth? Okay, we're going to define that. X so that Y is X so that Y by when. So X is what you want, what the goal is, what you want people to accomplish. Y is the desired results, outcomes from achieving that goal, and then by when, of course, is the deadline. So it's a good formula for creating clear expectations. So you need to be clear about what you want people to buy into.
Yeah.
The second element of buy-in is enlightened self-interest. So people have to believe that they are better off from their own point of view by buying in. For example, when you want to create some sort of change in your organization, invariably they're going to be people who are used to the status quo and they're comfortable with the status quo. They understand the status quo, and now you want to change something. You want to change a particular procedure or process. So let's say it's your sales team, and your sales team has been incentivized based on gross revenue. And so you have, and what that's resulted in is 85 to 90% of your sales being to ideal clients, and maybe 10 to 15% of your sales to not ideal clients. And that 10 to 15% is dragging down your profitability because it's increasing your waste and your rework and your stress and frustration, etc. But for the sales team, they've just been incentivized on gross revenues. Mm-hmm. And they're used to their bonuses being structured that way. So now you want to move to something different that says, okay, we're still going to pay you on gross revenue, but only for when you bring in ideal clients. Ooh, now that's going to create some resistance. And if you just say, this is going to make you better off, this is going to make the company better off, then they're going to say, well, what's in it for me? How am I better off? Actually, I feel like I'm being harmed by this because my bonuses, my pay is tied to gross revenues. And so with enlightened self-interest, you want to make sure you want to have a process for understanding where people's reservations might be with this change, getting them to identify the advantages and disadvantages, and then determining, okay, what disadvantages can I just simply, I can make a subtle change and boom, that disadvantage goes away. What can I ameliorate? Where can I sweeten the pot? So in this particular, and I'm using a specific example from a client, we went through this exact scenario. And so what we came up with, what the company came up with was, okay, these are the 6 criteria that say ideal client. So there's no guesswork. And as long as you check all 6, good to go. Then you're still bonus is going to be based on revenues, but I know that if they check all those 6 boxes, I am going to be less likely to deal with a lot of waste and rework, etc. Because these are 6 boxes means ideal client. And if there is a great opportunity that doesn't check all those 6 boxes, well then the leadership team is going to decide. And if the leadership team decides that, yep, we're gonna go through this, move forward with this client, even though it's not ideal because we think there is significant upside, that's awesome. Still get revenue based, or get your salespeople get your bonuses based on that revenue. And if they say no, then you just simply move forward and seek other clients. And so through this process, the sales team, which was really resisting this change, now started to buy in. Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Now I know exactly what to look for rather than just looking for anybody.
Yeah. The The idea they understand the why behind, why do we want an ideal client? What does that even mean? So so having clarity about what is an ideal client is a huge first step, right? And if in this case there are 6 criteria that make somebody an ideal client, understanding why an ideal client is better to have on the roles than a non-ideal client. And it's like, look, it affects all sorts of things, and it's just like the supportive feedback. You said, here's the impact. When we work with a non-ideal client, it's costing us money. It is making it impossible for us to grow at the rate that we want to, so that we can continue to pay you the bonuses and the paycheck that you want. And
the end of year bonus is based on profitability. So the more profitable the company is, the better your year-end bonus is going to be.
Right.
So there are lots of things in it for you. So now we've armed you to be successful, and we've shown you, and now you understand that, from your own point of view, that, okay, I'm actually better off.
You talked about compliance in there as something that you want to avoid as a compliance culture where people are basically living in fear. But you have processes that people need to comply with. And there's an accountability piece about the standards and following those processes. So how do you navigate that I need you to follow the process, but I don't want a compliance culture?
Well, it gets back to this enlightened self-interest idea, where as leaders it's incumbent on us to describe the results, benefits, outcomes of a certain process or procedure. And so I found for me that when 95% of the time when somebody didn't meet my expectations, it was my fault. So I wasn't clear on what those expectations were. And so I forced myself to use X so that Y by when. X, here's what I want you to do. Y, here are the outcomes I'm looking for and why they're important. And then here's the deadline. And so when people understand the why, they can innovate. They can say, hey boss, I know that you said we're going to do something this way. I actually have a way to get those results faster, because they understand the desired outcomes that you want. So that it opens the opportunity to innovate. When you're just telling people what to do, you can get, to use your terms, malicious compliance.
Right.
Where, okay, well, I know this is a disaster.
Yeah.
I know how to do it better, but you told me how to suck the egg, and I am going to suck the egg exactly how you described. And we're gonna watch this thing, start.
You saw this in the military, usually with junior officers who had just got to their platoons, and they would start to micromanage their sergeants, and the sergeants, oh, that's how you want to do it? No problem. I'll do exactly what you said.
And when it's a disaster, it's like, I just do what you told me to do.
And the leader is standing there with his hands up going, but shouldn't you be using some initiative? Like, well, I would have, but you told me to do it exactly like this.
Yeah.
So I did.
100%.
Yeah. When I try to distinguish, and I'm just playing with this idea right now, distinguishing between compliance to a process or adherence to a process. I want them to adhere to the process, which I think is a softer word and lends itself to having some flexibility in terms of use your initiative and your common sense and your experience and your knowledge to find the way to that result. Yes, there are some non-negotiables within our process because, you don't get paid if you don't put in a purchase order, right? You have to do those sorts of things. And the necessity of bureaucracy is something that many small businesses struggle with. But yeah, if we can get people to adhere to the process because they are enlightened and they have a self-interest that is enlightened.
They believe that they're going to be better off.
Right.
By doing it. And people are going to use their agency.
Yeah.
In a lot of different ways. And they're going to manufacture agency where maybe you didn't intend. And so... Right. If people understand the outcomes you're looking for, they understand the process, they understand the outcomes, they're going to use their agency to achieve those outcomes faster. if they understand the why. If it's just telling people how to suck the egg, you'll get people who will use their agency to slow things down. Mm-hmm. Use their agency to slow roll things that they don't agree with, malicious compliance, those sort of things. One of the things I do is take leaders to battlefields, historic battlefields, and not as a battlefield tour, but as a platform to talk about business leadership, and to help people do things like, we have conversations about accountability and buy-in and things like that. And so Gettysburg is one of the battlefields I'll take people to. And there is Pickett's Charge, famous Day 3 in Gettysburg, famous Pickett's Charge, which ultimately did not break the Union lines, and the Confederates were defeated, and ultimately this began the decline of and fall of the Confederacy. One of the challenges that the Confederates had was their artillery fuses were notoriously bad, unreliable, and so they couldn't fire over the head of their troops because they had so many rounds that would fall short and kill their own people. And so the Confederates had to shut off the artillery early as Pickett's Charge begins moving forward. And so now the 20,000 people in Pickett's Charge are all under Union fire, and there's no Confederate counter battery. Well, part of the reason, and that contributed substantially to the Confederates' defeat that day, the reason why Confederate fuses were unreliable is not because of the processes or anything like that, because the Union used the same cannon on the same processes for their munitions. It's because in the South, enslaved people were in forced labor to build those fuses, and so they used their agency to sabotage the fuses.
Wow!
And help contribute to the Confederate defeat. So one of the and so then we'll talk about this, and then we'll talk about how do you get people to use their agency to promote your common good. How do you create buy-in so people are actively promoting your common good. So it becomes very, very fascinating conversations that lead to very practical business discussions about how do I do this better? How do I improve my own business? And we'll use these kind of stories as a way to generate these discussions.
Well, that's fascinating. I was not aware of the artillery piece of that. I've been on Gettysburg Battlefield doing staff rides with businesses for years, never leading them. That's not my bag, and I would defer to you on those because I know how well you know these battlefields and how well you know business. But I had not heard that particular piece of it, and it makes tremendous sense. And I think there's so many different parallels with what can happen in your company when you have people who don't feel like they're part of the success, or they don't feel like they're receiving some benefit from the success of the company. There's a lot of companies out there that think that the owners are walking away with all of the revenue at the end of the day.
Yeah, they think it's great for the owners, and it's not so great for the rest of us. And so I mean, we've got to pay particular attention to this idea of enlightened self-interest, and people believing that they're better off from their own point of view.
If they're enlightened, that means they have some knowledge that they may not have had before, and so it begs the question about transparency. I know companies that won't talk about money at all. They won't talk about where they are or their revenue with anybody who's not on the leadership team. Mm-hmm. I know other companies that they'll have an all hands every quarter, and they'll say, here's how we did this quarter. And they will put up these specific numbers. Now, the downside of that is if you're new and you don't know really how the business is run, you could look at that top line and go, oh my gosh, we made $1 million this quarter. How come I'm getting paid so crappy? The owners must be pulling in a Brinks truck every month and just unloading cash. What they don't see is all of the expenses that it takes to keep a place running, and that the margins are actually quite slim in most small businesses. And the most successful small companies that I see share that information. Like, look, we're not making a ton of money. We're barely getting by. Our margins are 7 or 8% when it's all told. And the owner's taking incredible risk, even having the business open at a 7% margin, because anything could really hurt us. And then we're not making payroll.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And I think they're like anything, the mean between the extremes is where the virtue lies, as Aristotle would say. And so you can be like completely, if you are just don't discuss it at all, as you said, people are going to come up with all sorts of explanations why.
Right.
And we're getting screwed, and the owner is making out like a bandit, and that's gonna be damaging. You can be so transparent that now you're creating a civil war within your own organization. Oh, Joe's getting paid $3,000 more than I am per year. I'm better than Joe at this, so now there's all this sort of backbiting and other things. As people start to war with one another. So there's a happy medium in there that says, yeah, these are our revenues, and here's where it's coming from. These are our expenses, and these are the categories of expenses. Here's where we are, and then we've, as owners, talk about, okay, well, here's how we're going to increase that profitability, because we want to create even bigger bonuses next year. And so you'll talk about how to grow the top line and how to reduce the bottom line, so to speak. And so that will then lead to the third element of buy-in, which is confidence. So we talked about clarity, enlightened self-interest, and then confidence. So if you're going to make a change at work, we talk about change management. Well, buy-in is really about change management. Then the third element is that is confidence. People have to believe that your idea, this new process, this new approach is going to work. I've been one of my clients has been a fire department, and the fire department has had significant tension between the leadership and the floor, so to speak, as they call it. Labor management tensions, to the point at which trust had broken down, and it's just constant warfare between the union and the management. And they, when you look at the elements of buy-in, they're all very clear that they wanted a better relationship. They understood that how they would be better off as individuals and as a department with a better relationship. They had no confidence that they'd get there. Mm-hmm. They didn't know how to do it. And so they asked me to help them. And so using this as a diagnostic tool, so clarity, enlightened self-interest, confidence, recognize that, well, where we're really falling short is on the confidence side. And so what we need to do is do some simple trust-building measures that increase the confidence that these two groups can work together successfully. And so we took some baby steps that led to bigger steps. So things like the fire chiefs were going to spend much more time in the stations, actually talking to people rather than feeling under siege in the headquarters. They were going to. We agreed to. Both sides agreed to do. Catch the other doing something right. So nice. When they did something right, they would acknowledge it. Hey, I like how you did this. I like how you did that. I like how you visited the stations. I like how you diffused this situation. And so they would catch each other doing something right. And then we had done a culture survey and identified some areas that could be improved, and they developed working groups, labor management working groups to work on those. And then they started resuming regular labor management meetings. And after about 90 days of this, suddenly they're working together, to solve problems. And so they built the confidence that they could successfully work together. And as a result, they went from a net promoter score of lower than 4 to now closer to 8. And, we, of course, want to get between 9 and 10. A substantial, and that was over a 9-month period, that Net Promoter Score change. Substantial difference between, in just a fairly short period of time.
So I think the firemen and the troops out there probably care less about a metric called a Net Promoter Score, but they care about, is my daily life a little bit better?
Yeah.
Right. Am I getting along with the people at the station? Do I cringe when the chief walks in, or am I happy to go tell them what's going on?
Right. And so because those things are getting better, they're saying, yeah, I would recommend this as a great place to work, whereas before they weren't.
Brilliant.
ABCs.
ABCs.
So accountability, buy-in, and clarity are vital to any organization. And I love helping small businesses, medium-sized businesses work on those things, because ultimately that's going to be what leads to profitable growth.
I love it. So there's so much to unpack. I'm gonna have to go back and watch this episode to take more notes here. But if I'm taking a swag at it, the accountability is not confession. It's going to stand out for me, right? And the idea of the supportive criticism as opposed to the constructive criticism, that's a great takeaway for me as well. That we're noting the performance and the impact and the corrective action with the how can I help you do that? Right. And so now it's supportive, and it's like, how do we move forward to a better future, as opposed to me just saying, hey, you know what, go be better.
Yeah, exactly. And the specific wording of what does ideal support for me look like is very important, because if you just say, how can I help?
Yeah.
The employee just wants to get out of the conversation. So let's say, oh, nothing, I got it. And they don't, but they don't want to say that. So when you say, what does ideal support for me look like? And you've already identified some ways you're going to support them, then that open-ended question is going to get a much better response. It's like, boss, I appreciate you doing A, B, and C. I actually also need help with D. Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, and leader, by the way, you're going to have to follow up with that when they tell you.
Yep.
Yeah. Other takeaways, obviously, from the clarity piece of this, being absolutely clear about what it is that your expectations are and where you're going. But the buy-in piece, I think, is really solid, right? It really sticks with me. The clarity and enlightened self-interest, and the confidence piece of that. The word confidence coming from a Latin word which means trust. And you talked about building trust and doing trust exercise to gain confidence. And I think sometimes we think of confidence as more of a personal trait of somebody who feels or looks self-confident. And yes, their self-confidence comes from trusting their own abilities. But when we're talking about confidence in an organization or in a team, or confidence in your leaders, it's really comes down to trust. And I know we could do an entire other episode on how do you build trust and what are the components of trust and what does that really mean? Because I've had the benefit of being mentored by Chris Kolenda and gone through sessions on how do we unpack the idea of trust, and then how do we bring that as leaders to our organizations and to the people that we lead.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. And of course, one of the foundations is the ancient Greek word of arete, which you are very familiar with. Excellence and what that all means.
Yes, we could do a whole other session on just what is arete and why it should be in everybody's lexicon. I think a lot of people could benefit from having a perspective of excellence, and not just a specific excellence, but excellence in all that we do. That's what we try to teach and help leaders do here at Five Eagles Leadership. And Chris, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I always learn a ton every time we get to speak, and I can't thank you enough for being here, man.
Yeah, back at you, Bob. I learn a ton from all of our conversations, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time on your podcast.
Awesome. Quickly tell the audience how can they best get in touch with you?
Go to my website, chriskolenda.com. Kolenda, chriskolenda.com, and you can see all the things that ways that I help people.
Love it. And for you out there who are thinking about getting some help with your business, if you just want to think about your business differently or think about your business better, get a hold of Chris. He is an amazing mentor and coach, and he's going to help you see your business with new eyes. So thanks again, Chris.
Thank you, Bob. Happy holidays.
Likewise.